Hi there, Steve Arterburn here, and thanks for joining me for Going Deeper. And we're going to go a little bit deeper into that magnificent marriage that we all want to have. What I want to talk about is this area of intimacy. And there are three different areas of intimacy I want to talk about. And so here we go. Do you want a more intimate marriage or not? Some people have given up on physical intimacy because there's no emotional intimacy, no spiritual intimacy. Don't do that. You know, there are certain things that happen when we are physically, sexually intimate with each other, and if at all possible, we want to keep that going as long as we possibly can. And in this book, The Mediterranean Love Plan, there are 7 different secrets from different cultures over in the Mediterranean. And one of them is this longevity secret from the Greeks over on the island of Icaria, where people forget to die. And many of them are talking about the best physical sexual intimacy up into their 80s. Here, we give up at 50 in the United States. So I just want to encourage you that not just to look at what I'm going to talk about from a physical or sexual intimacy standpoint, but emotional, spiritual, and physical. So why don't we start with the spiritual, which impacts emotional. Fred Stoker and I, we wrote Every Man's Battle, and probably, I think, the most valuable book in the series outside of Every Man's Battle is Every Man's Marriage. Why? Because it's based on an oft-neglected verse in Scripture. If you go to Ephesians 5:22, it tells you that a woman should submit to her husband. And it goes on for about, 45 words that explain how this ought to happen. Then right after that, there are over 90 words to a man on his need to die to self for oneness in that marriage. Be willing to die to yourself the way Christ died for the church. She gets 45 on submission. He gets over 90 for dying to self, sacrificing himself. But all that is in the context of Ephesians 5:21, where it says, submit yourselves one to another out of reverence for Christ. So Every Man's Marriage is it's a book that's based on that verse. It's about mutual submission. So if you want to have spiritual intimacy, there's no dictator over here and the doormats over here. Doesn't exist. So mutual submission. Then we see direction for her, direction for him. It's not just a place to go and say women ought to submit to men. That's so foolish for that to be the one-dimensional teaching that comes from that passage. It's mutual submission. She submits to him, he dies to her or dies to himself for sake of that marriage. See, that's mutuality. Which doesn't that sound much more what Jesus would be calling for? He honored women, honored children, when they weren't honored very much in the culture in which he was on the face of the earth. So that's how we move into spiritual intimacy, by seeing the value of each other. And of course, that has an emotional impact on us. Now, emotional intimacy, let's go beyond that. Two people who are mutually submissive. I think the minimal acceptability for emotional intimacy is being present. Now I got to tell you, I have attention deficit disorder, terminal case probably, and this is something that I've worked on in my marriage, and I have a wife that's asked me to. But what we're talking about is being present in the moment for emotional connection and emotional intimacy. If I have a story in my head about my wife, I'm relating not in the present moment, but I'm relating to the story from the past. And that's what I've got rolling around in my head, trying to kill off, rather than being able to be present with her and for her. That is the goal. So if I'm thinking about something we ought to do and plan for in the future, that's not being emotionally present in the present with her. So if you want to be emotionally intimate with another person, you have to be right there with them, eyeball to eyeball. One of the things my wife taught me is that babies need love downloaded into them. And the Bluetooth is eyeball to eyeball, downloading that love. And really, you can't put too much emphasis on the need for love downloaded into the heart of a child. Same in marriage. If you want to be intimate, you stay present, you look at each other eye to eye, you're not answering your phone, all that kind of stuff. You're not looking at videos, you're present. Okay, so a little bit there on spiritual intimacy. And can you have spiritual intimacy if you're two different faiths, or one has faith and one doesn't? Well, not optimally, but you could still have a level of spiritual intimacy and then emotional intimacy. And that leads us to physical intimacy. I believe, and by the way, we did a survey and discovered the 7 things that are most valuable in marriage and the 7 things that are most destructive in marriage. And it all went in to the 7-Minute Marriage Solution book. And it's important that we take a look at some of the things that help and some of the things that don't. Okay, first thing that helps is to be able to respond romantically to each other rather than protect myself or withhold. So we have to ask, why would I need to protect myself rather than respond romantically? If I'm married to somebody who has to protect themselves, then that somebody needs to get help. Or I am so scary, or I have been so unfaithful that I need to get help so that they can trust me again, so they can respond romantically. Responding romantically doesn't mean that every time I touch or kiss, we're going to go to bed together, we're going to have sex. No. Responding romantically is just in the moment. It doesn't have an agenda. Sometimes it's obvious that it needs to lead to sexual intimacy, other times not. So really important that we get the help, take away the roadblocks that prevent us from responding romantically to each other. Second thing, we need to have grace and forgiveness as a foundation so that we're not holding grudges against each other. The Bible says, get rid of all bitterness and resentment. Boy, does that ever impact a marriage. And some of you're in the midst of being betrayed. Well, that's not when you forgive. You take action to try to head off that behavior. And boy, the intimacy, of course, is out the window there. But when we have an intimate relationship, it can be destroyed by holding a grudge, by not forgiving, by not letting the person have the grace and forgiveness that we also need. Another thing, affirmation versus criticism. What is this person good at? What are their strengths? Let's affirm those strengths. And I'll tell you, I don't think criticism is helpful. I think people, when they're criticized, they dig in their heels. They don't want to move. They want to justify. They want to defend. So if you're critical, no wonder your spouse is defensive. There has to be a better way where you talk about things. You present feelings, ideas, options, different ways to relate together if you are not liking the way things are going. Now, the practice of lifetime vows. I think that when you make a vow in the marriage, you're essentially saying, I will only have sex with this person. I will be dedicated to this person and no one else. But when you look at the Bible, it says that there would not be even a hint of sexual immorality. That's the standard. It's purity. So when I am taking a vow to get married, I think I need to be vowing I'm not going to have sex with anybody else, but I'm not going to have sexual experiences. I'm not going to lust after other people. I'm going to not have the hint of sexual immorality. And so I want to practice lifetime vows, not just saying I won't ever have sex with another person. I want to clean up my act, and I want to live a life of purity in my commitment. Boy, when I know my spouse is pure, and when the spouse knows you're pure, now you've set a foundation for intimacy, especially resulting in physical intimacy. And then if there's anything that we can do to build respect for ourselves, spouse respecting me, not demanding respect, but I build that respect, anything I can do to build up my respect for the other person by looking at the strengths, honoring the strengths that are there. And then I've got to always be willing to heal me. I've got to look at my struggle, my weakness, whatever it is, and I need to heal me. If I'm not in the healing process for me, then I'm in trouble. And then before I tell you a little story, this final thing is I need to be willing to get out of my comfort zone a little bit. Now, when it comes to physical intimacy, there is a subset of behaviors that's okay for both. What she thinks is okay and what he thinks is okay, where they overlap, that's what is acceptable. Pushing someone to do things that are unhealthy because you saw them in a porn flick, no, not good. So we need to accept each other and our limitations. We need to be patient with each other, but we also need to be willing to get outside of our comfort zone a little bit to improve physical, emotional, and spiritual intimacy. Now let me tell you what I'm talking about when I say we need to be willing to get outside of our comfort zone. After I got married, wasn't great. We didn't have sex when we were single, and then we got married, and it wasn't great. Honeymoon wasn't great, so I admit it. So my wife is looking at the computer one day, and she said, oh, look at this. In Arizona, there's a place you go, some physicians come in, physician couple, and they teach you all about sexual intimacy, anatomy, all this stuff, and you learn things that you never knew before. I said, well, that's really interesting. And then I realized it wasn't just interesting, she wanted us to go. Well, we did go. It was very conservative, and here's what they did. They lectured during the day, and the first night, it was my job to do things for her without sexual intercourse that were pleasing to her. Second night, she did things for me that were pleasing, but they weren't sexual intercourse. And we did all this stuff other than have sexual intercourse, and then the final night there, we had sexual intercourse, and it was absolutely fantastic. But here was the thing. I was willing to go and work outside of my comfort zone on the things I had never been taught. And so I just got to encourage you to be willing to say, I don't know everything, and I might need to read a book, I might need to look at videos, I might need to go someplace where I could learn some things. Now, the dream that I had was to do something in the area of intimacy, and so we created our Intimacy in Marriage Intensive, where we look at all these elements of emotional, spiritual, and physical intimacy. You can find out about that at newlife.com, or you can just call 1-800-NEW-LIFE and say, tell me about the Intimacy in Marriage Intensive. And you know, people used to have to travel to go to those, pay for hotel, food, all this over a 3-day period. Now they're online, never been more accessible, never more affordable. But all the things that I said here, what I would really like to say is go do that, and you will be doing the thing that has been designed to help the most in all areas of intimacy. So that's my magnificent marriage for you. A lot of great things, none greater than intimacy. You have a partner, you have a friend, you have a companion, you have somebody to challenge you, and you have somebody to be there when life is all but challenged. All right, thanks for joining me. 1-800-NEW-LIFE. You need some help, newlife.com. And I'll see you next time right here on Going Deeper.